You know, lately there has been lots of progress in reforming the war on drugs, from the Obama administration dialing down jail time for nonviolent drug offenses to several states that just completely legalize pot. Almost any reform to our longstanding war on drugs is, of course, an automatic reform for racial justice. And that's because our drug laws are enforced in such patently unfair ways. White and black Americans, for example, smoke similar amounts of pot, while blacks are close to 4 times more likely to be arrested for it. So there was big news this week, surprising to many, that the new liberal mayor of New York, who ran on ending racialized policing, is still presiding over an aggressive and uneven policy of pot arrests. A study released this week by the Marijuana Arrest Research Project says New York's on track to make over 28,000 marijuana arrests this year. That would be equal to the amount made in 2013 under Mayor Bloomberg. Blacks and Latinos make up 86% of those arrested for marijuana so far this year. That is striking. Now, this is a national epidemic. Lives ruined, dreams deferred for an activity that surveys show almost 50% of Americans have engaged in. And that's a point Lawrence O'Donnell made when pushing the NYPD and police around our country to heal themselves.
These marijuana arrests are ruining lives, making it impossible for some people to keep their jobs, making it impossible for some young people to go to college. It is also a racist government enterprise operated in plain sight by local government, state government, and yes, the federal government. Police officers all over the country are incentivized in various ways to keep their arrest numbers up, to meet their quotas. And the easiest way for many of them to do that is to simply drive into black communities and stop and frisk black people, which they do here in New York City as an official sanctioned policy of the department.
Joining me now for more is Gabriel, the New York State Director for the Drug Policy Alliance, and Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM Radio. Welcome, gentlemen.
Well, thank you.
Tell me about the report.
Well, the numbers are alarming. They show that the arrests in New York City are not going down, and we're on track to make as many arrests this year in New York City for marijuana possession as last year. And 28,000 is no small number. It's certainly down from the year 2011 when we had 50,000 arrests. But 28,000 is the number of arrests that was the average under the Giuliani years. These need to be down at 0. That would be an appropriate number for marijuana possession arrests in New York City, and that's where we got to get to. And these numbers are showing we're not there.
Let me cut this debate into 2. 1, whether it should go down to 0, as you're advocating, and 2, whether if we're going to enforce this in this city and around the country, whether we do it fairly or we do it in a racist way. I think those are 2 pieces of the puzzle. Let me read to you, Mark, what the president said about this.
Sure.
To David Remnick of The New Yorker. Middle-class kids don't get locked up for smoking pot, and poor kids do. And African-American kids and Latino kids are more likely to be poor and less likely to have the resources and the support to avoid unduly harsh penalties. We shouldn't be locking up kids or individual users for long stretches of jail time when some of the folks who are writing those laws have probably done the same thing. Here in New York, what's so interesting and why we wanted to look at this tonight is you have a mayor who ran on this and who has done, I would say, incrementally positive things on stop and frisk, which is also racially discriminatory. And yet these numbers can't be spun.
No, they can't. And where you have in other states progressivism on this issue, states changing laws, this is a national debate about changing this approach. It really doesn't make sense that in a city and a state that supposedly is as progressive as New York, with a mayor who ran against this very issue, this is appalling and it is unacceptable. And this, quite frankly, is an example of the institutional racism we still see here in America. It's not the Clive and Bundy or the Donald Sterling type racism. That's individual, that's rhetoric. But sometimes this is even worse because this directly affects more people, directly affects more minorities, and it prevents them from getting jobs, prevents them from going to college. It has a widespread effect and it has to be done away with.
Well, Mark, you're making such an important distinction there, which is we have been talking about, you know, Clive and Bundy or Donald Sterling and these words, and then we have discussions about what kind of America we're living in.
Right.
I would submit it doesn't really matter how and why all these cops are making these stops. If the sum result is this racist, right, as we've been reporting here, then what's in their heart is actually secondary to the result. Let me play de Blasio speaking on the last word about this. Take a listen.
When it's used unconstitutionally, which has been in a lot of cases here in the city, as we found out from our federal court system, when it's used in a discriminatory process, a discriminatory manner, it's absolutely unacceptable. And the fact is that the policies of the city have supported, our mayor, our police commissioner have supported an approach that has been discriminatory and has torn apart police and community relations.
So that was in August on specifically stop and frisk, which was overwhelmingly used to target African-American young men in the city. While that program's changing, you're seeing the pot arrests not really change.
Yeah, and that's where we have to really pay attention here. De Blasio came in with Bratton. They said, we're going to take care of the stop and frisk issue, and stop and frisks have gone down, and that's good. But the fact that marijuana arrests have not gone down is a strong indicator that we can't say that just because the stop and frisks have gone down, that everything's hunky-dory, we're fine now. We need a coordinated, focused program to address the institutional racism that is the hallmark of these arrests. And then that needs to be put into place immediately so that we can address this problem. This is not one that should be hard to solve. They should just stop making the arrests. I believe that the de Blasio administration is committed to do it because he ran on this. He said it all through the campaign. We're going to stop this. It's even on his campaign website. We think they're going to do it. They just got to get around to it, and that time should be now.
So let me go to the politics, Mark, because what's so striking is that Mayor de Blasio here is being called out by Chris Christie and Republicans in Washington, Eric Cantor, for being Mayor Havana, for being so liberal. And he really did run on civil rights, on equality, and on economic empowerment. A lot of big progressive issues, and maybe he needs time. But from your perspective on the politics, how should people be pressing him here?
Well, they should be pressing him very hard, very aggressively, and asserting that this policy is a problem. It is discriminatory. It is not helping at all. And this was, after all, a promise he made. And really now you have to wonder whether or not the cessation of stop and frisk, so to speak, is somewhat negated by these types of arrests not going down. I mean, I think that's a very serious thing. What's the point? What's the point of ending stop and frisk if we're still having this kind of a problem? So we need to continue to press him as hard as we can.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, beyond the reporting and the data you have, when we look at 86% minorities under these arrests, I can tell you from living in New York, there are a lot of other white people using pot and drugs. This is just not reflective. And then anytime you have a policy enforced that way, then you have to look at the systemic racism, even if it's not intended, which was the point you raised. We're out of time, but Gabriel and Mark, thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate it.